Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Halftime Talk. I'm delighted to be joined by Amena Bakr, Chief OPEC Correspondent with Energy Intelligence. Amena, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sean. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure to have you, Amena. Let's kick off with a little bit of sort of reflection down memory lane of the last year on the OPEC beat. In some ways, Amena, the biggest surprise of the energy markets over the last year maybe wasn't so much that they came together around such an unprecedented agreement of close to 10 million barrel a day cut, but the fact that they've actually complied with it. That's somewhat the unprecedented outcome here. They've done agreements in the past, always struggled to secure compliance at a sustained and high level. How do you think that was achieved on this occasion?
Sean, I think because the group was really hit by an unprecedented event. The coronavirus the pandemic took everyone by surprise. Its impact was massive on oil markets. We've seen lockdowns all around the globe, and oil prices plummet quite swiftly. So the reaction to the markets, I think, brought the group closer together. They brought them together to reach the agreement of cutting 10 million barrels a day. But they also realized if they don't carry out this agreement, if they don't actually cut those barrels, then they will remain in that situation. And nobody could afford to have oil prices at that level. And everyone was really eager to have demand rebound. So motivated by that, I think they stuck together. They were scared of remaining in the situation where oil prices didn't recover swiftly. So that was kind of the catalyst. Or
I mean, if you look at where it started, if you look at the starting point of this journey, let's say March 2020, the beginning was a kind of a fallout between Russia and Saudi Arabia in terms of finding agreement on strategy. Then we had Mexico, big oil producer in South America, not willing to move as far as the group wanted. I mean, it was born in what you would expect, a typically conflicted space out of OPEC. What would you, in retrospect, give Trump credit for banging all heads together and getting this started? Do you think he deserves that kind of credit in retrospect?
I know that he gave himself that credit, and sure, yeah, Trump was one of the elements that helped bring the deal together, but it's not the only factor here. You have to also give OPEC members, both Saudi Arabia and Russia, some credit here, and their leaderships of those two countries. I mean, if you didn't have them agreeing to come to the table, then we would be in a similar situation. And also give credit to all the other OPEC plus states. As you mentioned, Sean, we saw Mexico, a really unexpected member of the non-OPEC group, cause issues and kind of block the deal from happening, and it had to wait for a couple of days in order to give them an exemption. So if we had other members also causing these kinds of problems, we would be in a similar situation. So I think we need to give the group members, the core group, OPEC and non-OPEC, credit for this deal.
I suppose we would acknowledge that before this agreement, the sort of COVID agreement, which was struck in last April to last 2 years, the OPEC Plus had a few years already under their belt in terms of agreements for what started, what am I going to guess, my memory, 2017, 18, when they first came together, OPEC plus the 10 other countries. They essentially brought Russia and the others into the OPEC tent. In doing so, and at this point, who is in charge of OPEC plus? Is it Russia? Is it Saudi? Is it both? How do you read it from the point of view of the leadership of this disparate group of countries?
Sure. As many observers and I guess as journalists, we always look, I mean, just let's look at the OPEC group first. We always say Saudi Arabia is the de facto leader of the OPEC plus group. Now, when we had Russia and non-OPEC join, obviously Russia is the biggest player or the biggest producer in non-OPEC. So together, Russia and Saudi Arabia became, I mean, just if you're an outsider, you would think, I mean, those two large producers are the main drivers behind OPEC. And to us as journalists, I mean, before any OPEC meeting, we always look at what is Russia's strategy, what is Saudi Arabia's strategy, and we would think that that strategy would drive the group forward. So that's the thinking. But at the same time, Sean, I know that within the group, there isn't, I mean, for Saudi Arabia especially, they don't want that idea that Saudi is leading the group, Saudi is dictating. That's kind of rejected. And the example that you gave of Mexico causing issues and rejecting a deal and standing in the way is a case in point where you have smaller members that are small producers actually voice out their opinion, and they have the ability to stop deals from going through or delaying the progress. So within the OPEC plus family, there has to be real consensus among all members, big and small. So even if we look at the strategies of Saudi Arabia and Russia combined, we have to also factor in that other members have to agree to this. And it could be stopped because of an unexpected opposition from one of the OPEC plus states.
I think OPEC countries and OPEC plus included now have always seemed to, when the sort of eyeballs of demand collapse and price collapse come, they can be quite cooperative, as we've seen in the past and obviously saw a year ago. But now, a year into this agreement, and with still a year more of it to go, it's a 2-year agreement, we're halfway through. Oil prices sort of well an anchored success story in the 60s, high 60s this week again. Where do you think the fractures still exist in this agreement? Looking the year ahead, the journey they still have to make. We're in the middle of a 3-month period of increasing supply now. Where do you think the fractures, the vulnerabilities may still exist in this agreement?
The obvious one, Sean, is again, continuing to stick to the deal, going through with compliance levels and going ahead with the cutting of extra supply of the compensation scheme, which OPEC Plus introduced. We had, I mean, the Saudi minister, Prince Abdulaziz, mentioned himself that the compensation strategy isn't working as much as he wanted it to work. So that's still an issue and a factor that we're monitoring. But also, differences in opinions among members. Russia still has this understanding that this deal or its participation in the group is temporary. It's only going to be part of the group when it's aligned with its own interests. So there's always that question mark: when is Russia going to exit? So that's something that I mean may cause conflict in the near future.
Well, I suppose you've always had that unique period in the last 4 years where Russia and Saudi and the US, as we just talked earlier, Donald Trump, former president, had a unique alignment, which typically is not the case. And we're seeing now with the Biden administration, a return to the normal sort of posture of US-Russia friction, and obviously US-Saudi very critical alliance. That triangle may not be as harmonious under a Biden administration as it was under a Trump administration.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when Trump left, one of the things I've heard from many of the officials in the OPEC Plus group is that they lost a friend. But they know that Biden isn't their friend. There isn't that open communication, that close contact, coordination, helping and putting OPEC plus deals and facilitating and so on. That doesn't exist anymore. So with that, of course, yeah, the risks exist in keeping the group together. But again, Sean, I would go back to the fact that I think all members really learned a lesson from last year. One, because of the pandemic, and two, because of the huge fallout. And they realized that, I mean, this is more harmful than not.
One of the challenges coming up, I mean, in the second year of this agreement is the return of Iran. We have the US and Iran and the permanent members of the Security Council currently week 4 of negotiations in Vienna to try and rehabilitate the Iran nuclear agreement. It looks like they're getting pretty close. All signals are, at least at the moment, that it's when rather than if this deal will be rehabilitated. And with that, of course, is the return of Iran to the international oil markets. I'm wondering what challenge that may present to OPEC Plus in the second year of this agreement, and who makes way for these extra barrels of Iranian crude that comes back to the market.
That's a very good question, and one that the Secretariat is also closely monitoring. And I understand that they've run scenarios to when Iran is going to be ramping up its production and exports. Now, making space for Iranian barrels, yeah, I personally don't see any of the Gulf states willing to make space for Iranian barrels for a number of reasons, include political in them. I know that Russia and Iran have a close alliance, but again, would Russia really want to sacrifice some of its market share or supply to its domestic market or have its quota adjusted for Iran? That's not clear. But from the Iranian side, I mean, they seem very confident that they can ramp up quite quickly. They're adamant on not having an OPEC plus quota until they've reached their pre-sanction levels. And it's understood that this is their right too. It's understood by other OPEC plus members and the Secretariat that any country that has these kind of exemptions or has been under sanctions, it's its right. It has a right to bring back its barrels to the market.
Which we've seen with Libya already, right? They're already back at 1.something million barrels and they're still outside the quota.
That's right, but it's also in Iran's advantage, Sean, if prices don't collapse. So perhaps there will be some kind of informal talks among the group that they need to protect this market for the interests of everyone. Perhaps the increase should be gradual. Not exactly giving Iran a quota, but kind of managing the supply to the market in the interest of the group. I've seen quite a strange story over the Eid break saying that Iran had requested Saudi Arabia to help them sell their oil. And it was based on Iraqi sources, I believe, in one of the media publications. I don't remember which one, but it just seems like a strange story. And
there was reports that they had met bilaterally in Iraq over the last few weeks.
Yes, that's right. Those are like more on like diplomatic talks, talking about the resolving the war, ending the war in Yemen, etc. But there was an oil element also introduced to it, which I checked into, but it doesn't seem that it's.
Well, the Iranians are already exporting about 1 million barrels a day, according to secondary sources. I think even Energy Intelligence have reported that kind of data. Is that what you're seeing? That, I mean, we're already seeing a very significant increase in Iranian exports over the last 4 or 5 months.
Yes, yeah, there has been a ramp up in Iranian exports from several ports in the region. They've been increasing their exports, and according to what we're seeing, that the Iranians seem quite confident that they can sign a deal with the US very soon, and that would lead to the easing of sanctions.
Well, it's certainly a good time to have this problem, if you like, with demand rising and the global economic growth forecast so strong. So it certainly is a better time to see a major oil producer return to the market than, let's say, a year ago when, of course, demand had collapsed. So I'm sure they'll probably find a way to navigate that. Looking at that point, OPEC Plus has had the big target over the last year of returning global inventories to the 5-year average, which is the sort of reference in which they sort of see a balanced market. They appear to be getting there, and to a certain extent may already be there. In the US, they say inventories are below that line, and globally they're close to it. How do you think that impacts OPEC's thinking now, given that that was such an obsession in the last year? How does that change, do you think, their thinking and strategy in the coming year?
Well, we saw, Sean, during the last OPEC meeting, I mean, they agreed to start easing their quotas. And this is gradually happening. Saudi Arabia as well, that voluntary cut they had of 1 million barrels a day is going to be eased gradually. So I think over the coming period, if they're more confident in demand, let's see how the situation in India also plays out with the lockdowns there and the spread of the pandemic. So the more confidence they have in the market, the more easing we're going to see. Just put in mind that they've delayed the easing for a while. So we will see more of that happen throughout the year. Again, let's also try to understand like how Iran would factor into that. If they do come back online, we might see a little bit of a slowdown in that easing process. But it's too early to say how it'll play out.
It seems to me that generally they've been comfortable with prices at 65. They're not necessarily defending 70. So as long as prices can hold at 65, or they will be comfortable adding new supply. What's your sense of the price point that they're really they would see as their floor, if you like?
Yeah, they hate talking about prices. They never give us a price level but yes, from my understanding is that a little over 65 or 65 is a comfortable level. You don't see a lot of panic from OPEC Plus members. And I understand from sources close to Aramco as well, this is the average that they're looking at, and they're comfortable bringing more projects online at. So 65 appears to be a good target for them.
In terms of looking at energy intelligence outlook for the year ahead, do you have forecasts for where you see supply demand balance, where you see price forecasting?
Yeah, we see, I mean, $70 is very attainable. We were saying it's 70 is the new 60, and we see that happening. Although again, we're watching supply from Iran and Libya, etc., very closely. And in terms of balances, by the end of Q2, Q3, we see the markets balancing in a little bit of a deficit happening on the supply side, which might mean that OPEC Plus could be more relaxed in bringing back more barrels into the market.
If we might just wrap up, Amena, a little bit, being a senior OPEC correspondent, a senior journalist in the Middle East for many years, you've never had a year like the last one. None of us have. How has it been continuing to do your beat, continuing to deliver the quality news while essentially not being able to go anywhere?
Well, as I mean, any journalist would tell you, Sean, the most important thing are your contacts, or the people who you know. So staying in touch with people in the know, officials, etc., has been crucial. Been using my phone a lot more. You don't want to look at my phone bill right now. It's horrible. But and actually, I mean, staying in the region for so long, you really capitalize on the number of years we've been, for myself and other journalists that have been here for a number of years, and having a passion for covering this sector, not just covering it on a surface level, but actually caring about what you do. That really translates well. And I mean, many of the officials here in the region and in the Gulf do want to make a difference in what they do. So when they feel this passion exchange, and you really want to inform the market of what's really happened and tell the news, have a positive impact on markets with an independent voice, of course, that really makes the difference between good coverage and bad coverage.
And are sources receptive? Obviously, we've all been compelled to operate in this space. Have they been more forthcoming than maybe they would have normally been, or is everybody adapted to being available more online on the phone than maybe they would have in the past?
The good thing is that we're all in the same boat. If I'm in lockdown, everyone else is in lockdown around me.
Right.
Everybody else is in front of a screen and on their phone. And believe it or not, I mean, we sometimes say we're bored, we feel it's claustrophobic, and so do they. I mean, even in the highest officials. So they're feeling, we're all human at the end of the day. We're all feeling the same things. So yes, we're all connected to our laptops, our phones, and we're picking up. I mean, that's the only way we're communicating. So I would say, yes, yeah, absolutely. They're more receptive to, but they would only, again, pick up the phone if they know the person.
Exactly, and they've had good previous experience. In terms of, we've had announcement in Dubai this week that live events are now being permitted, and gatherings of 100 or more, and different conditions, but ultimately live events are coming back, at least in Dubai. Where do you think OPEC's at in the possibility? They've had virtual meetings every month. It's been incredibly convenient, incredibly efficient. Do you have any sense when the first real live OPEC meeting could take place? September, or what do you think?
Well, they were supposed to have the 60th OPEC anniversary, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
It was supposed to happen over the summer. I believe June was initially planned, but it was communicated from the Iraqi government to other members that, again, the spread of OPEC and the difficulty in traveling and so on. So they delayed that to September. So now the new date is sometime in September. So let's see, maybe we'll meet in Baghdad in September.
Baghdad in September sounds like a nice place to wrap up this interview. Amena Bakr, Chief OPEC Correspondent at Energy Intelligence, thank you so much for joining us on Halftime Talk this week.
Thank you, Sean.